The house next door had always been quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet you find in early mornings or snowfall, but a silence that felt unfinished, like a sentence that never reached its end. In most American neighborhoods, sound is a sign of life. Garage doors rumble open, dogs bark behind wooden fences, kids shout each other's names across front yards, music leaks through open windows. Even at night there's movement, a low hum of people living their lives. But the house next door made no sound at all. Ethan noticed it when he was 9. Every weekday morning, he waited for the yellow school bus at the corner with other kids from the block. Parents waved from porches, coffee mugs steamed in hands. Someone always complained about being late. Someone always laughed too loudly. And right beside all that noise stood the quiet house. Its paint was faded gray. The porch light never turned on. The curtains were always drawn. No car ever parked in the driveway. No packages sat by the door. No footsteps crossed the porch. At first, Ethan thought the house was empty. He asked his mom one morning while she packed his lunch, "Mom, does anyone live in the gray house?" She hesitated just long enough for him to notice. "Yes," she said carefully, "an older woman." Ethan frowned. "Why don't we ever see her?" His mom closed the lunchbox and rested her hand on top. "Some people don't like to be seen," she said. That answer didn't satisfy him, but he didn't push. As the years passed, the house stayed the same. Ethan grew taller, his voice changed, his interests shifted from toy cars to video games to late-night music through headphones. Friends came and went. Summers felt shorter. Winters felt longer. Still, the house next door remained untouched by time. Sometimes, late at night, Ethan would notice a faint light through one narrow window upstairs. It never stayed long. 10 minutes, maybe 15. Then darkness again. It felt like the house was breathing when no one was looking. When Ethan was 13, he saw her for the first time. It was early August, the kind of afternoon where the air feels thick and slow. The street was quiet, most families hiding inside with air conditioners humming. Ethan sat on the front steps, scrolling on his phone, half bored, half restless. Then the sound came. A door. He looked up. The front door of the gray house opened slowly, like it hadn't been used in a long time. An elderly woman stepped out. She was small, almost fragile. Her hair was silver and pulled back neatly. She wore a pale blue sweater, even though it was hot outside. One hand held on to the doorframe, as if the outside world required balance. She paused, looking around the street like she was memorizing it. Then her eyes met Ethan's. For a moment, neither of them moved. Her expression wasn't angry or afraid. It was surprised and tired, deeply tired. She nodded once, not a greeting, just acknowledgement. Then she bent down, picked up a newspaper from the porch, and went back inside. The door closed, and the silence returned. That night, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about her. He wondered how long she had lived there, why she never left, why the house felt so heavy with quiet. "Dad," he asked at dinner, "do you know the woman next door?" His dad shrugged. "She's been there longer than we have." "Does anyone check on her?" His dad glanced at Ethan, then back at his plate. "She keeps to herself." That phrase stuck with him. Keeps to herself. It sounded like a choice, but it also sounded like a shield. When Ethan turned 16, something changed. The light upstairs stayed on longer at night, sometimes until dawn. The mailbox filled and wasn't emptied for days. One evening, as Ethan returned from his part-time job at a grocery store, he saw her sitting on the front porch. She looked smaller than before. She was wrapped in a light blanket, even though it was hot outside. Her hands rested quietly in her lap. Without thinking, Ethan slowed down. "You live next door," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. She nodded. I hear your footsteps every morning. That surprised him. I didn't know anyone noticed, he said. She smiled faintly. I notice many things. There was an awkward pause. My name's Ethan, he offered. I know, she said gently. That surprised him even more. I'm Margaret, she said, but you can call me Maggie. After that day, the silence shifted. Not suddenly, not completely, but enough to matter. Sometimes Maggie sat outside in the late afternoon. Sometimes Ethan waved. Sometimes they spoke about nothing important at all. The weather, the neighborhood, how fast time moved. One evening, she told him about her husband. He used to come home loud, she said, smiling at the memory, slamming doors, laughing too hard, turning the TV up too high. What happened? Asked Ethan. He passed, she said simply, years ago. Another day, she mentioned her children. They moved away. Jobs, families, life. Do they visit? Asked Ethan. She looked at the street, then back at the house. Not anymore. Ethan learned something important that year. Silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means everything has already been said and no one was listening. When Maggie fell ill, Ethan noticed before anyone else. The porch stayed empty. The light stayed off. The house felt heavier than before. He told his parents. They went together. Maggie lay in bed, thinner than before, but her eyes still recognized him. I'm glad the house wasn't quiet forever, she whispered. A week later, the house was quiet again, but this time it felt different. Ethan stood on the sidewalk, staring at the gray house, understanding something he hadn't before. Some houses aren't empty. They're just waiting. The quiet after Maggie's passing felt heavier than before. Not louder, not dramatic, just heavier. The house next door stood exactly as it had always had, but Ethan could feel the difference. It was no longer waiting, it was holding something finished. The porch chair remained where she used to sit. The curtains stayed closed. The mailbox overflowed again, this time with final notices and unopened envelopes. Ethan found himself looking at the house more often than he meant to. Sometimes in the morning before school, sometimes late at night when the streetlights buzzed softly and the world felt distant. He kept thinking he might see the porch light turn on. It never did. A few weeks later, a moving truck arrived. That sound alone felt wrong in the quiet of the street. Men carried boxes out of the house. Old furniture, lamps, framed photographs wrapped in newspaper. The front door stayed open for hours, showing a glimpse of the inside for the first time. Ethan slowed his bike as he passed. The house wasn't dark inside like he imagined. It was simple, clean, almost too empty for someone who lived a whole life there. One of the men noticed Ethan watching. You family? He asked. Ethan shook his head. No, just a neighbor. The man nodded like that made sense. After the truck left, the house sat empty again, but this time it really was empty. Or so Ethan thought. A few days later, his mom called him into the kitchen. There's something for you, she said. On the table sat a small cardboard box. Ethan frowned. What is it? She said it was left with the realtor. She said it was for you. Inside the box was a notebook. Old, worn. The cover soft from years of use. Ethan's heart tightened. He knew without opening it who it belonged to. That night, he sat on his bed and opened the notebook carefully. Inside were pages filled with neat handwriting. Dates, small observations, quiet thoughts. She had written about the neighborhood, about the kids waiting for the school bus, about the seasons changing, about footsteps she heard every morning. One page stopped him cold. The boy next door grew taller today. His steps sound heavier than time likes. Ethan swallowed hard. Another page read, I didn't choose silence, it chose me. One goodbye at a time. He kept reading. She wrote about her husband, about the house being full once, about laughter echoing off the walls. She wrote about her children, how she understood why they left, how she waited anyway. And then, near the end, she wrote about Ethan. Ethan waved today. The quiet feels less sharp now. I sat outside again. He noticed. I'm not invisible anymore. Tears blurred the words. Ethan closed the notebook and held it against his chest. He realized something then. He hadn't just been keeping her company. He had been reminding her she still existed. Years passed. Ethan left for college, moved into dorms, shared walls with strangers, lived in places full of noise. But he carried the notebook with him. Sometimes, late at night, he would read a page or two. It grounded him, reminded him to notice. After graduation, Ethan moved back home for a while. The gray house had new owners now, a young family. Kids on the porch, music through the windows, life loud again. But every now and then, Ethan still saw Maggie there. Not really, but in the way the porch light flickered, in the way the sidewalk creaked under footsteps, in the way quiet moments asked to be respected. One evening, he sat on his own porch as the sun set. The neighborhood buzzed with sound, and for the first time, Ethan understood something clearly. Silence isn't empty. It's full of everything people didn't know how to say, and sometimes all it needs is someone willing to listen. Ethan did not realize how deeply the quiet house had shaped him until much later in life. At the time, it felt like just another memory tucked away somewhere in his childhood, something small, something personal, something easy to forget when life became busy. But life has a way of circling back. Years after college, Ethan moved to a different state for work. New city, new apartment, new routines. The building was loud, always alive with footsteps, doors, music, voices bleeding through thin walls. At first, he welcomed the noise. It made him feel less alone. But slowly, something about it began to tire him. One night after a long day, he sat on his couch with the window open. The city hummed below. Cars passed, sirens echoed, people laughed somewhere nearby. And yet, for the first time in years, he missed the quiet. Not silence, quiet. The kind that listened back. He pulled Maggie's notebook from the shelf where he kept it. He hadn't opened it in months. Flipping through the pages felt like stepping into a different version of time, one that moved slower, one that noticed more. He stopped at a page he hadn't seen before. I wonder if anyone will remember this house when I'm gone. Not the walls, not the roof, but the life that lived quietly inside. Ethan closed the notebook gently. I remember, he said aloud, surprising himself. That was the night something shifted. He began noticing people more. The elderly man who sat alone on the park bench every morning, the quiet coworker who always ate lunch by himself, the neighbor across the hall who never spoke but always nodded politely. He started saying hello. At first, it felt awkward, forced, small. But small things had mattered to Maggie, and they started to matter to him too. Years later, Ethan married and moved into a house of his own, a modest place in a calm neighborhood. Trees lined the street, kids rode bikes in the afternoons, dogs barked behind fences. Life felt full. One evening, while unpacking boxes in the garage, Ethan noticed the house next door. It wasn't loud, it wasn't empty, it was quiet. Its lights stayed off at night, the porch remained unused, no car ever left the driveway. The feeling hit him instantly. Not fear, not curiosity, recognition. That night he asked his wife, "Do you know who lives next door?" She shrugged. "I think it's an older man. He moved in recently." "Have you met him?" "No," she said. "He keeps to himself." Ethan smiled sadly. some phrases never changed. The next morning, as Ethan left for work, he slowed near the fence between their yards. The front door next door opened. An older man stepped out carefully. His movements were slow, measured like someone who had learned patience the hard way. He looked up and noticed Ethan. For a moment, both men froze. Then Ethan smiled. "Good morning," he said. The man hesitated, then nodded. "Morning," he replied. A simple exchange, but something in Ethan's chest warmed. Days passed, weeks. Sometimes they waved, sometimes they didn't. One evening, Ethan noticed the man sitting on his porch, staring at the street like he was waiting for something that might not arrive. He remembered Maggie's words, "I hear your footsteps every morning." He walked over. "Mind if I sit?" Ethan asked. The man was surprised, then shrugged. "Sure." They sat in silence for a while, not uncomfortable, not forced, just shared. "My name's Ethan," he said. "Frank," the man replied. They talked about the weather, the neighborhood, time. Frank mentioned his wife, how she used to sit where Ethan was sitting now, how the house felt louder when she was alive. "How long has it been?" Ethan asked gently. Frank looked at the street. Long enough for silence to settle in. Ethan nodded. He understood. Over the months, the porch wasn't empty anymore. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just sat, and slowly the house next door changed, not in paint, not in structure, but in presence. Years later, after Frank passed, Ethan stood by the fence looking at the quiet house. He felt the familiar weight, but this time he didn't feel helpless. He felt grateful, because he had learned something early in life. Quiet houses are not empty. They are full of stories, of love that stayed too long, of goodbyes that echoed, of people who waited. And sometimes all it takes to change a life is noticing the silence and choosing to not walk past it. Ethan went back inside, closing the door softly. The neighborhood continued its noise, but somewhere between the sounds, the quiet still lived. And now it was no longer alone.